the National Hamfest here in Newark, and we've got a great interview lined up here for us today. I'm with Mr. John Mattocks. He's head of the planning preparation group for the RSGB and gives advice on planning. And at the moment, you've just got a new booklet that is very hot off the press because it's released today, isn't it, John?
Yes, it's the planning permission guide, we call it, which is a booklet which sets out really the essential principles of how the planning system in the UK as a whole actually might affect amateurs if they're wanting to apply for particularly for larger masts and antennas within a residential area that they may live in. So it's a little booklet we've had around for quite some time, actually, but it was very much out of date. The previous edition was 2006, so it's taken us 12 years to update it. Very much needed updating because it deals with the 4 countries of the United Kingdom, but although the basics of the planning system are the same within the 4 countries, each of those 4 countries has been tending to move away with devolution, particularly with Scotland. But Wales as well has been moving away from England in terms of the basic rules that apply. So you do need to understand, if you're asking the question as to whether planning permission might be required for an aerial, as to what the rules are in the particular area, the country in which you live. Whereas policies are set by local authorities within their own local areas, and of course they deal with the planning applications, any planning application you may need to make. The rules and regulations of what does need or doesn't need planning permission, that is set at national level. So this deals with everything that hopefully sets out pretty well everything that you might need to know if you're going to need to make a planning application. So we're hoping to be able to help members. This booklet, by the way, is available to members on a members-only basis. It's a very limited edition in printed copy, but it's available for download from the RSGB website. And we would, because we've only produced 100 of these in printed version, that we would ask people to download off the website in preference to asking for a printed copy if they possibly can.
Yeah, that sounds great, and that's a really good reason for being a member of the RSGB, because if you're not a member of the RSGB, this sort of service isn't available to you. And John, I've been told you've got the right qualifications to give the RSGB and its members the correct information, because you've done planning for a long period of time in your life, haven't you?
I'm a chartered town planner myself, yes. I started work as a planner in local authority back in 1971. So what's that now? That's 47 years. And I moved from local authority to central government as a planning inspector in 1985, and I was a planning inspector for over 30 years. And since then I've been working in my own capacity as a chartered town planner. So yes, I found it quite fascinating, in fact, to be giving advice to amateur radio enthusiasts wearing my professional hat. I've tried to steer people as far as possible through the maze of legislation. But at the end of the day, I'm afraid it comes down to the planners in each local authority as to what approach they might take. Most of those dealing with planning applications are relatively junior, and they probably have never come across amateur radio in their lives. And so, whereas we give general advice, we can't hold members' hands to any great extent. A lot of the work has to be done by the individual member. The booklet contains advice on how to go about making an application. I mean, in particular, what to do if you put an aerial up without permission and you get a call from the local enforcement officer basically threatening to take action against you if you don't take your aerials down, which is a bit of a bluff, actually. We tell people this in the booklet. In other words, don't do anything initially because they can't actually make you take the aerials down just like that. There are procedures to be followed. It's only if you receive a formal enforcement notice, and that will only happen if you don't apply for planning permission when you need it. You can forestall any action by applying for planning permission retrospectively, and there's nothing wrong in doing that. Because it's a fairly unusual situation for most local planners. Unless it's a massive 20-metre mast with an 8-element Yagi on the top of it, if it's a much more modest aerial array, then you quite likely not to have any problems with it. In other words, people will not complain about it, and you might be able to keep your aerials up for the 4-year period that is needed for it to become an established development, which can't be enforced against. So there are certain advantages in carrying out development, and then waiting to see what happens. I'm afraid that often is the situation, and it does assist in actually assessing the true visual impact. But in planning, the main issue should always be the effect of the development on the wider area, on the character and appearance of the area. Much too much, in my view, is made of the effect on neighbour amenity. And that is only a planning consideration in very limited circumstances. If the development has a direct effect on the neighbour, simply, and this is a point I make in letters of support that I send out. If a member contacts the RSGB and is asking for assistance, and they put in a planning application, they ask us the RSGB to submit a letter of support. I do that, and I do it and I sign it myself, giving my professional qualifications, because I think that tends to be taken more note of than just a generalised letter of support from the RSGB. And so I do that, and if it doesn't result in a planning permission being granted, then we also give advice on how to take things through to appeal. And of course, I've dealt with appeals myself as a former planning inspector. So we are trying to assist members, and as you rightly say, that is a service that can only be used by members. Much of what needs to be done is set out here, but any questions, then by all means come through the AR department of the RSGB and come to us for further assistance, and we'll do that. But getting back to the enforcement situation, it is nice if you are faced with a threat of enforcement action, but the message that we say is, if you put aerials up without planning permission, you get a threatening letter from the council saying take it down or else. Our advice is don't, because that they can't make you take it down at that point. You should apply for planning permission retrospectively for what you've done. That then forestalls any enforcement action, and it will hold off. You can go to, they might indeed grant permission. But all that initial letter means is you've done something without applying. You should have applied first, but you can apply. There's nothing in law. It is not a criminal in any way. It's not a criminal offence to do something without planning permission, without applying first for something that needs permission. There are fees payable for planning applications approaching £200 now, that. One thing we do stress in the booklet, the differences between the different countries. So the difference between the fee rates between Scotland, UK, between Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And there are also differences in the precise way in which the system works. We do try to reflect that in the booklet. So yes, we do encourage members, if you want to apply, to look at the booklet first, and to go through it. If you have any questions, as I say, come back to us through the RSGB, and we do what we can to assist.
Well, that sounds good. That sounds good. Now, you mentioned very early on in what you were saying just now about most of the planning officers are probably that young they would have never seen an antenna like we do. And our hobby is effectively, quite retro now. And the situation is that I think we have to educate and be polite and educate and try and educate your neighbour and educate your planning officer nicely and cooperate wherever possible. Wouldn't you say?
No, that's absolutely right. We do stress that the first thing you should do when you're thinking about putting any antenna system up that requires permission, virtually anything other than a wire dipole attached to the tree at the bottom between the house and a tree, in very simple terms, virtually anything else requires permission. Even a vertical attached to the end gable of the house, if it projects significantly above the ridgeline, strictly speaking, needs permission. Many will turn a blind eye to it, much as they do with TV aerials or satellite dishes. There are provisions for satellite dishes, but yeah. So when you get in mind what you want to do, talk to your neighbours. By all means, talk to your neighbours, and as far as possible, if you can keep them happy, then what that means is that they're less likely, stress that, less likely to write to the council objecting to what you propose to do. It also means as well that you have certain modest proposals you can probably carry out without applying, and the neighbours aren't going to complain to the council. But if there is a neighbour who is likely to cause difficulties, or you've had a bit of a run-in on something else completely unrelated to amateur radio, then that probably means that they're likely to object. Now, simply having an objection from a neighbour doesn't mean that the planning commission will be refused, because the planning officer has to assess any proposal on its individual merit. As I say, the first consideration is the effect it will have on the wider area in visual terms. So if it's a 20-metre mast with a large yagi on it, that is much more obvious over a wider area. I'm disappointed that more than often we're getting responses from councils that the amateur radio installations are not in character with the residential area. Well, I'm sorry. That is just a misunderstanding of the nature of it as a hobby activity. And it, as you say, it's largely because these days there aren't many amateur radio operators out there. And so, yes, many of the junior staff in the local authorities have not come across these developments before. And they'll say, out of character with the residential area, full stop. Well, I just can't, as a professional planner, I cannot accept that as a matter of principle. If that ran through as a matter of principle, we would never get any aerials for anything. And I'm often asked, can we not lobby government to get a reference to amateur radio? We've tried. The reference to amateur radio in national guidance was withdrawn in 2012. Prior to that, it said amateur radio installations generally cause no difficulties in residential areas. That was withdrawn. We've tried recently to get some reference to amateur radio back in. They're just not interested. They just don't want to know. It's not seen as an issue. So it's left to local authorities to set their own policies, and so we get a different approach in different local authorities. So it's potluck as to which local authority you're in. And if you're in England, you're going to find it a lot more difficult than in Wales, where there's still national reference to amateur radio in the policy guidance. So you're absolutely right that you need to keep your neighbours on side. But even if you do get neighbour objections, don't give up the ghost. Don't say, oh, well, that's it. I've got an objection from the neighbour, I've got no chance. No, that's not true. The local planners should assess it on individual merit, and there should be a direct effect. It's not, I say in my support letter, it's not enough just because a neighbour says, oh, I don't like the look of it. So what? you have a right to do what you wish on your own property unless it has a direct effect and a wider effect. Simply the neighbour being able to see it, in my view, is not enough. It should not warrant a refusal of planning permission on those grounds. I personally, not just as a professional planner or as an amateur radio operator, but I do feel very strongly on that point. I really can't stress it more strongly. It's a message that I intend to try to get out there to my own professional colleagues if I can. I intend to write to the local authority associations to see if I might be able to get some sort of guidance issued through that medium to local authority planners. If the central government won't do it, maybe the RSGB can. And that's something I want to take forward as the chairman of the Planning Advisory Committee for the RSGB.
Right, so that's very, very interesting, John. I've taken a lot of your time. I'm going to paraphrase pretty much what you've said. If you remember the RSGB and you need planning permission or need advice on planning permission, there is a new booklet available on the website as of today. Please go and read it. If you're really stuck, you should be a member of the RSGB in the UK, because the RSGB may be able to help you with planning permission issues. So that's pretty much where we are. And John, I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon, and wish you all success in the future.
Thank you very much.